Okay, we're recording, and I'm talking to Carol Painter. Carol, thank you so much for coming on the show. You and I have done lots of sessions together, which I absolutely love, but this is our first one that we're sharing with other people. So tell me a little bit. I already know this information, but for the sake of everybody that might listen, tell me a little bit about your author journey and where you're at with your writing right now.
Sure. Well, I probably should just start by saying I'm in New Zealand, thus a different accent to get used to. So now that you may have tuned in a wee bit, I'm someone coming late to writing. I've always loved writing, but it's never been a part of my career apart from business type writing, fundraising mostly. But in retirement, I've just had a ball in kind of letting it rip, really. So I've been learning the craft as I go along, creating all sorts of things, some a lot better than others. And I'm loving the journey. So I'm kind of in it for the journey as much as the end point. The novel's been on the go for about 6 or 7 years. I write short stories as well, and I do a flash fiction, like 500-word entry every month, but it's quarterly.
Nice. What do you love about it?
About writing?
Yeah.
Well, I've always loved learning, so I'm curious and I love learning new things. So this kind of brings my happy zone of reading fiction, which, you know, when you've studied a lot, you don't read, well, a lot of people, and I certainly didn't, went for years not reading any fiction. Yeah. And then once over that, you can sort of indulge your interests and get into the world of fiction again. So learning how it all happens so seamlessly, which is still a source of wonder and amazement to me when I read. But, you know, being able to kind of, I see what they've done there, you know, so good, so good. And I love words. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, you use them well. So I'm excited about looking at this piece. It's funny, whenever you send me, I've told you this before, but when you send me things now, I'm always like, I don't know that I have anything to say about this. Because it's really good.
To say, Jeff.
Well, that's true. I mean, Carol, I always find something to say. But whether or not it's of value or not. Okay, so tell us a little bit. We're going to pick up in scene 7.
Right.
In your story. So tell us a little bit about your story and kind of what it is we're looking at. And then I have, just to warn you, I have 2 kind of big questions to ask you about the piece. And then a lot of like little things to look at, but like 2 kind of overarching questions for the scene. So tell us a little bit about what we're walking into.
All right. So essentially, I've got a protagonist who is a New Zealand woman. She's just around 29. She's a teacher. She's escaping from a violent relationship, and she has ended up taking up a teaching position in Vanuatu, which is a country in the South Pacific island. And so she's fled there very ill prepared for the job she's going to. And she's getting to grips with the new reality of where she is and her job. But she has not only left the relationship, but she's left her mother unaware that she's basically left the country. And so even though they haven't really got on very well for a long time, because since her father died suddenly when she was 9, who she really worshipped, she and her mother have had this pretty turbulent relationship for the last nearly 20 years. And so she's left the country without telling her mum. So she's kind of thinking she really should be telling her mum, but it's a pain. She just wants to get it over with. And she is expecting to be, you know, creating a fresh life for herself in Vanuatu. And then suddenly something's coming out of the past, and it's kind of to do with her family relationship.
Gotcha. Okay, and we're going to look at this scene where she calls her mom.
Yes, after putting it off for, days.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's look at it together. So there's kind of 3 pieces to this scene. There is her alone in the house, waking up in the morning. And then there's a knock at her door, which happens kind of at the end of page 1. And there's 2 women, she can't remember the names. They bring her eggs. They ask if they can help her unpack her house, and she tells them to come back soon. And then at the top of page 3, we get kind of part B of this scene. And in part B, they come back and they unpack the house together, and they laugh and they chat. They have a grand time. They have a really great conversation about kind of dangerous animals that she might encounter, which I found, I mean, look, no notes. You got a page of no notes. You know how rare that is for me. Page 6 was great. Fantastic conversation. They leave, and then we get part C. And part C is she decides to call her mother. And then part C has 4 sections to it, which we'll talk about. So I want to talk about each of those. I want to talk about part A, part B, and part C, each as different sections, because I think they each have their own unique problem.
Okay, good.
As always with your writing, Carol, the writing's beautiful. You're a beautiful writer. So just to give people listening a sample, barefoot and still in her nightie, Clarissa stood in the kitchen holding a pot under the tap as she waited for the steady trickle to deliver enough water for a cup of coffee. I mean, just the simplicity of that image and the directness of the language, like the efficiency of the language, really brings it, like paints an image that I love. And I love that about your writing. I love how like efficient and often even poetic your prose is. So my question with this opening scene, she has this like reflection. She contemplated the open, almost full cartons opposite, which I wasn't sure what that meant. But then she turns off the tap and she lights the gas ring, unsure from her living experience whether the gas might explode into her life. Once the circle of sameness to be settled and complete, she put the pot on to boil and wandered around the room. It's hard to recall with the packed cartons or remember the contents of the 3 kitchen cupboards she held a candle to the previous evening. So this first section, part A, I'm lost as to what I'm learning about her here. I don't like, you keep it tight, right? Like you have 5 paragraphs before there's any dialogue, and that's a great amount for the start of a scene, right? Like we want to get it to like 3 to 5 paragraphs, no more than that, and you land it right at 5. But I'm confused as to like, she's wandering around the house, she's looking at her unpacked boxes. What am I learning about her in this space?
This scene is the first proper day that she has in her new setting. So she's arrived at the village where she's staying in her little semi-detached concrete pad late in the day before, and really put her stuff down, had a meal with people in the village, brief introductions. And so I haven't yet done any world building around her new situation. Okay. And so what I was trying to do was just locate it and give a bit of context for where she was at the beginning.
Okay. Giving context is great. But the piece, now that I hear you say that, the piece we're missing is the emotional context.
Right.
You're giving great spatial awareness. This is her house. It's in boxes. She doesn't remember where anything is. She doesn't remember where her cupboard is. But I need to know how she feels about that and what that's, because you know you and I have talked about this before, but just to complete the circle for anybody that's listening, your story is an emotional journey. And this is one step in her emotional journey, a pretty big step. Like you're saying, she's just made this big change. She's running away from a relationship. The exit is quick and fast and stressful, right? Anxiety building. And there's a sense of relief when she gets off the plane. Like, okay, I've made it. And now we're seeing the like knew the second act of her life here.
Mm.
How does she feel? Is she regretting me? Is she excited about me? Is she exhausted by the fact that now she has to rebuild? Is she energetic about having to rebuild? But you can see how like what her emotional state is going to change this description of the house. And it's going to make it much richer for us because it gives this description of the house purpose. Right?
I
Like,
think, I mean, she is exhausted. She is emotionally, and I would say the relief is probably in the background now because she's she's come through Port Vila, been there for, a week or two on an orientation. So she's got clear of the danger that she's left behind.
yeah.
So that's in the past, but now she's in a completely unfamiliar environment. And so she's emotionally exhausted, probably a bit physically exhausted, but she's all really at sea in terms of what do I do? How do things work? It's all new. And she really is very, very strongly not wanting to get anything wrong.
Okay. So there's the consequences of her decision are laying into her now. And the fear around like starting the second act is showing up. Then I kind of want to see that.
Right.
As she's looking through the house. So like here, like barefoot and still in her nightie, Carissa stood in the kitchen holding a pot under the tap. Tell us something here about like she was struggling to focus on anything and she wanted nothing more than just to go back to bed. She could spend all day in bed, not to rest, but to just avoid the mess that is her new apartment. Does that make sense? Like, but using the mess that is her apartment,
bring it in,
like the mess that she needs to unpack in her own life, brings kind of a new energy to these 5 paragraphs that I think moves into part B really well. So here, you actually have 2 days in these 5 paragraphs. And I'm going to recommend that you keep it 1 day. And especially with what you just told me. So I'm going to say that I would say that she's up. She's trying to wake herself up. I would have this, I love this paragraph where she's looking around the kitchen and she can't remember where anything is. And then I would give her a sense of like being overwhelmed. And I'd have her not knowing where to start and not knowing where to go, especially since I know where part B is going. And I'd have, give her a little bit of depression here about, and I have her question like, was this right? Should I be here? And then instead of saying like, as the dawn broke hours early on day 2, I'd have her go back to bed. And then have the knock at the door and make her wonder how long she's been asleep. Does that make sense? Like,
okay, yep.
Because there is an arc here, part A and part B, there is an arc here of like failure, and we'll talk about the motivations in part B. But if you show her failing here to work on her own, then part B is going to feel like a success with the community, which I know is a theme of this work, that she's going to find like new life in in becoming a part of this community. She's going to rediscover not just herself, but also her family. I don't know, how do you feel about that?
That last bit that you said isn't where it's going.
Okay.
So that's not her arc, really.
Okay.
She's not going to. Well, it's in a sense it is that she's going to learn something quite profound about how certain kind of challenges and things are dealt with in this environment, in this culture, which is not how she's been stumbling around trying to deal with them. So in a sense, there is a thread of what you say, the more I think about it, actually, because she takes from that to then, take a new direction in her own life. But it isn't, and family is certainly Yeah.
What is her character going to learn from the locals in this book?
Um, She's going to learn that things are not black and white, as she believes. It's her underlying kind of way of thinking that things are right or wrong, very polarized, very
Okay.
naive. In some ways, it is a coming of age story, in that she's going to, even though she's in her late 20s, she is going to become a more rounded, complete,
Gotcha.
nuanced adult by the end of the book.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking these questions, Carol, is because in this scene in part B, let's move into part B. So we start with her depressed and kind of failing to move on her own, and then she gets these two women knocking at the door, and they're bringing her eggs. And she doesn't want to let them in because she's not dressed. And so, and then they come in and they all unpack the apartment together. It's a very nice scene, but the problem with part B is it's lacking in conflict.
Yeah, and that's that's one of the major notes I had reading your comments. I thought it's probably a good thing to explore a little bit, because I know in theory that a scene is supposed to have conflict, and I think we're coming into conflict later in the scene. But
Yeah,
I think what
part
you're
C
saying,
has great conflict.
yeah, but what
Yeah.
you're giving me, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, you're sensing that we go far too far into the scene without a sense of something like that. There's got to be something that, otherwise it's a bit boring. It just goes, it's got something earlier.
Yeah, I think I got about halfway through it and I was like, why am I reading this? What's happening? Like, and part of it is, and these are the kind of the things I want us to unpack. The two women that show up at her door are Ruby and what's the other one's name?
Oh, Evelyn, and don't worry about the name thing. That's got to be changed. It's silly.
We'll just ignore that.
Yeah.
Evelyn and Ruby are the two characters that come to the door. They bring her eggs and they want to help her unpack, but I didn't ever really understand why. I didn't understand if this is like a cultural thing. This is what they do.
Yes. It's very culturally normal for a foreigner coming into this society who's going to be working there to have some local, and who's living with a community, to have some young women assigned to come and help. And it will do your washing, we'll clean, we'll cook with you, we'll do this. And that this is the kind of scenario that is here. So they would be like 18, 19 probably. Okay. And Ruby is going to be a constant throughout. The other one, not so much.
Kind of disappears. Yeah, and that's fine. So how do Ruby and Evelyn feel about strangers coming to town?
Well, with Clarissa, she's a woman from another country, a bit older than them. They're quite curious and fascinated. They're there on behalf of their community to be really helpful and make sure she knows what to do. They're curious, helpful, and I think because they're women together, and I really wanted to have a bit of this, they are interested in what another woman from another culture is like, and so that's a bit of fun kind of interaction. Yeah. That I wanted to bring in.
Okay, so Ruby and Evelyn are curious. They want to know what she's like. They're interested in this woman from this other country, and they feel like they're ambassadors of their culture. This is something that they are supposed to do. What are the consequences for them of failure? If she doesn't let them into the house, what happens to them?
I think that on that one instant, not a lot, but if that was a pattern of behavior, I think that would be quite unacceptable in the community, and they would feel like they'd let their community down, probably. Okay,
so there is not high stakes. Like Ruby and Evelyn are going to be cast out for like not getting the stranger to let them in. But there is kind of like a, why didn't you take care of this woman? Type low stakes for Ruby and Evelyn. They want to do it, but if it doesn't work out, they'll be like confused by it, but like nobody's going to murder Ruby because she doesn't get the eggs into the house, right? Like, so it's a low stakes problem. How does, one of the things I also don't, so Clarissa shoos them away because she's not dressed. I mean, it's very kind of you, Ruby, but ... I'm not quite ready. She managed to avoid the words "not dressed." Shall we come back soon? Clarissa nodded fast and appeared to be grateful. Maybe in a half hour. And thank you, Tomas, so much for the eggs. So here we have this, like, this is really where the conflict fails. The conflict of the piece. Because the conflict of the piece for Ruby and Evelyn, I sensed what you were saying, that this is like a cultural thing. They're curious. I think you play their curiosity well. Where they're kind of like unpacking boxes and giggling about things and like trying to find, like, just interested in what they're doing. But what you do here with Clarissa is you make the conflict about not getting dressed. She's just not ready to have somebody over. And then, like, on the next page she is. So, like, conflict resolved. And now we're into, like, we're just going to unpack boxes. And she seems to appreciate the help. Right? Like, so we're just missing any, like, tension in the passage.
Right.
And you can have, like, conflict doesn't have to be high stakes, right? Like, somebody doesn't have to die, right? Like, that's not, but we do need something that's going to cause Clarissa to make choices.
Right.
Right. And right now she's not making it. The only choice she makes is to tell them she has to get dressed before they can come inside. So we need more choices for her. So how does she feel about she's depressed, you've said, she's realizing, like, the weight of what she's done. How does she feel in that state about having these two strange women want to come into her house?
Well, it's a conflict. It is a conflict for her because she wants to please as well and do everything right. So she doesn't want to reject them, but she's embarrassed because they've found her at this time of the morning not dressed yet, and she doesn't want them to realize that. She will think, probably quite rightly, they've been up since the crack of dawn, and she hasn't. So there's that. Is that enough conflict?
That is conflict, as long as you contrast it. So, because what you're talking about is a conflict within Clarissa.
Yes.
She wants to let them in. She wants to look like she's a competent and successful woman who's participating appropriately in culture. What you're missing, though, is the emotional tone before they show up at the door, which is what she really wants to do, is not think about what's happening, put her head under the covers and hide.
Actually, Jeff, what is happening, what is connected here, and it's already been in the previous couple of scenes where she's in Vanuatu, but she's not yet in her permanent situation, which she's now, is she's wrestling. She's someone who's fiercely independent, and she's having to let other people steer her life and tell her how to do things. And she's fighting this, and she knows she has to surrender control a lot, but it's an ongoing battle, and there's part of that here as well.
Okay, then we need to change part A.
Okay, because that bit where she would have unpacked her own stuff by preference, but it's normal for someone to come and help you do your unpacking, so she's having to sort of give and doesn't want to offend.
Okay, so part A, rather than her being depressed and overwhelmed by the boxes.
I don't think depressed is quite right, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing you say. I'm hearing you say that depressed isn't right. I wouldn't go for overwhelmed either.
Okay.
I would go for frustrated with herself.
Yes.
That she needed to sleep.
Okay.
Because people who are active, like, so I do this to myself all the time. I am a high achiever who wants to like do well. And I'm very self-conscious about not doing well. I want to be up every day at 5 a.m. I want to be working before my children show up. Like, this is like, no one has told me this has to happen. No one, but this is self-implied pressure, like you're describing from Clarissa.
Yes.
And there are days like when I recently had COVID, where it didn't matter what alarms I set or what what lights I slept with on. My body was not going to allow me to wake up at that time. And every day when I got up late, I was frantic and anxious and frustrated with myself for not starting my day in an appropriate way. So if that is where Clarissa is, we need to change this thing where this fourth paragraph about her having heard the roosters and then falling and accidentally falling back to sleep is the opening paragraph.
Okay.
And then she needs to be rushing around, trying to figure out what time it is, opening multiple boxes, can't decide what box to open. And you can still introduce the world that way because she's like, she's turning on the stove. She can't figure out if the gas is on or not, but it's not a sleepy thing. It's like an anxious, frantic, oh my gosh, what if somebody caught me sleeping in? Then when these women knock on the door, the conflict of like, I'm not dressed and I don't want you to know that I'm not dressed makes sense.
That feels good.
Okay, that's great. So then the conflict as they work together, because we need to take Clarissa on an emotional arc. She can't just get dressed and let them in and be okay, right?
No.
Because that's like, it resolves it too quick. So you need them to you need her to let them in. She thanks them for the eggs. They return an hour later. She lets them in. And then this moment where it's like, I would accentuate Ruby and Evelyn's curiosity, where they just start opening boxes.
Okay.
And I would have them, because right now they come in and Clarissa starts giving them directions. I would have them come in and I would have Clarissa say something like, thank you for coming over, but this really isn't necessary. Like, I can do all of this. I'm, you don't have to worry about me. I'm capable of doing all this. And then I would have Ruby just open a box.
Oh, yeah.
Be like, what's in here? And have Clarissa be like, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And then have Evelyn open a box and pull out something that's unique to Clarissa that isn't part of their culture and be like, what is this?
Yeah.
And have Clarissa be like, no, don't worry. I can do that. And then have Ruby unpack, because she's like, what's nice about the situations you've set up here is that you have two well-meaning people who are very curious, who have her double teamed. So you got to play into the double team. Whereas she's stopping Evelyn, Ruby is doing something over on the other side. And then she runs over to Ruby and she's like, oh, well, this is what that's for. And this goes over here. And as she's doing that, Evelyn is dumping another box out over on the other side of the room.
Great.
And then you can build the conflict of Clarissa not being able to stop them from unpacking. And I would just have her sit down on the floor, kind of lost. And I would have Ruby say to her something like, good, you sit, we got this. And just have them start unpacking the house. And that's when you can have this emotional transformation for Clarissa in this moment where she can just talk to them. And then you can have these really nice conversations that you have in here down toward the end where they're talking about like the different types of animals and like the different, what life is like here. And so once she surrenders control to let these two women kind of explore her things and put them away, she can find some relief in connecting with these women. Does that make sense?
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, that really does make sense.
Yeah, and then you can lose all of these. You've got all these big paragraphs here where you're just describing what Clarissa's telling them to do. You can lose all of those and get straight to the conversation. And every once in a while, have Ruby hold something up and be like, "Where does it go?" And have Clarissa be like, "In the kitchen." And have Ruby be like, "In the kitchen," right? Like, just have these two women celebrating unpacking this new friend, while and she can let go of control. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then we have a nice character arc in this part B. Now, before we solidify this, let me ask, this fixes all of that. Like, if you're okay with that solution, it fixes all of the problems I had. It gives motivation to Ruby and Evelyn. It gives conflict between Clarissa, Ruby, and Evelyn. It gives Clarissa an emotional arc where she's finally gonna like surrender to them doing it because she can't stop both of them. And then it gives some emotional uptick for Clarissa as she starts to enjoy the company of these two women. But my only fear is, who is Ruby going to be to her? Is this a good introduction to Ruby?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. Ruby's going to be her go-to person right through. And when at one stage something happens that is connected with Clarissa transgressing something in the local culture, and Clarissa is really not sure what's going on, she seeks Ruby out to help her understand what am I doing, what's happening. Okay. So she's not a, I wouldn't call her, you know, you've got Clarissa the protagonist, and then there's about 3 or 4 major characters.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call her a major character. She'd be the next. She's a significant minor character. And
it sounds like she's a guide to Clarissa.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good.
So this is a good introduction to her. I like it. Another thing you can play up here. They are using a local dialect.
Oh yes, I'm having so much trouble with this.
Okay, talk about the trouble. I thought you did it really well. Talk about the trouble with it.
Well, actually, I mean, there's another layer to this that I'm sort of avoiding as well. The indigenous language, which is national, nationally recognized, is called Bislama.
Okay.
And I've got Bislama words in here, and it's very complicated because they teach in English Bislama, and this has changed in the last couple of decades as to at what levels. But in the villages, they tend to have their own local language as well. And
that is complicated.
I know. Yeah. And I'm avoiding that. I'm just staying with Bislama. So when I've read a few books that are written in Vanuatu, you know, other works, and looked at how they've dealt with things. And one I read recently, it's quite a lot of Bislama right through it, and the author, and it's fiction, and the author does not ever translate. And she's from the context, you kind of understand what is meant. And part of me is going, I like this approach better than having like a glossary or trying to explain.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that
all the time. Because that's very clumsy. Or explaining all the time is. And yet I don't want to put up barriers for the reader.
Sure. Does Clarissa know Bislama?
She's learned a little bit, and she wishes she knows more. So okay. You know, she's sort of a bit guilty that she hasn't swatted it up properly, but she's you asked about one of the expressions there at the top. How does she know what they are saying? Yeah, she's heard that expression before, and of course now it rings a bell. Oh, now she knows what that she knows. She wouldn't have been able to tell you what it was or to come up with it, but she has been taught it. So that's what I was trying to get at there. Really. Has she been taught it in the book? Have we seen her been taught that expression? She's had at orientation. We don't see her, but it's okay. Referred to that they've had an introduction. You know, they've got a whole lot of day-to-day language that they've been taught. It's okay to like summarize that for us. Okay. I feel though that you're not taking an opportunity here because okay. Clarissa.
you're saying that her arc is about letting go of control and depending on others. Her inability to speak the language is a huge opportunity and a place that could actually bring, if you have a compassionate, empathetic guide like Ruby, a place for some potential humor, where Clarissa is assuming that she's getting the language wrong.
Yeah.
And then Ruby can gently correct her. And then you can deal with how Clarissa responds to being corrected, and then how Ruby responds to Clarissa's response to being corrected, right? Like there's real opportunity here for some like depth of connection between these characters around the language.
Yeah.
And there's something in the humility to be able to say, I don't know and I need help.
Right.
And pushing Clarissa, using the language as a tool to show Clarissa's transformation from, I'm going, like in these early chapters, Clarissa needs to always be assuming she knows what it is and getting it wrong. And then Ruby needs to be correcting. And then we need to see Clarissa have like some self-shame and some denial, like, oh yeah, no, I knew that. That's what I meant. Right? And then you can just have Ruby smile and nod, like, okay. But then as the book grows, at some point, Clarissa needs to look at her and say, can you just tell me what that means? And that's that's a tool you can use to demonstrate Clarissa's character transformation. Does that make sense? So like here, maybe in a half hour and tank to Tumas for the eggs, I'd have her mess this up.
Well, she's already used Tanku Tumas. Do you remember the scene we did with the businessman at the airport?
Oh, yeah. She uses
it there.
Yeah,
she knows she's hanging on to those two words because she's not using much more than that. And she's overusing Tanku Tumas all the time. Thank you so much.
Funny. Can so we'll leave that one there. But when they say this, I would have her like interpret that to mean something else. Like maybe at the time that they're coming back, or like, maybe, just look at the word and see what comes to mind as a way that she might transliterate that in the wrong way. Have her answer, right? And be like,
wrong.
No, in like an hour.
Yeah. Okay.
And then have Ruby kind of smile and go, no, it means, okay, see you later. Okay. And then have her go, oh yeah, no, I know, I meant see you later in an hour. And then she can close the door and feel embarrassed that she got it wrong and couldn't admit that she got it wrong. If you do that 3 times in this section, and every time she refuses to admit that she was wrong, in order to save face, you use that tool to establish a character trait that you can then come back later with that tool in the book and show character change by how the same thing happens and she handles it differently. Does that make sense? It's like a mini repeated scene. You've got this thing that's happening over and over again. How she handles that thing changes, which demonstrates character transformation.
Right.
The character arc. Yeah. So I think so we've dealt with the motivations, we've dealt with the conflict in the story, we've dealt with, like, you can still get these fantastic, these conversations, like while on the subject of dangerous creatures, any snakes, Clarissa asked? Seriously, are there snakes? No snakes, no. Both answered. Spiders, poisonous spiders, I mean? They shook their heads. The centipede is nasty. Look, Ruby said, like, this is a charming conversation where these women are getting to know each other. It's very nice. If you give them action in it, where Ruby and Evelyn are unpacking her boxes and she's letting them do it, it gives that, like, Law and Order walk around as we talk about something feel that'll give this a little more action to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. It'll also compress your chapter. So you'll probably end up losing about 2 pages here. when you put the action from those top pages in with the conversation from the bottom pages, you'll lose a page or two, which will be nice, because this is an introduction. It needs to move, right? Like it's got to keep going. We don't want to hang out here all the time. We just want to like hit it, get the emotional arc, get Clarissa's surrender, get Clarissa start to feel comfortable with these two women, and then get them out of the house and get to mom, right? Because we want to talk about mom. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, let's talk about mom. Talk to me about how you want mom's voice to sound.
Normally, mum, that is Leah, is someone who would talk in quite a considered manner, with quite a lot of thought.
Okay.
She's not impulsive. She likes to think about what she says. She's been caught here by an unexpected conversation. She's picked up the phone and she's been hit with this stuff from Clarissa. She's not expecting Clarissa to ring. She's certainly not expecting what Clarissa tells her. So she is shocked and stunned. So thus, silence occasionally on the call, which I can see we can use better. Yeah. Is that enough to get going?
It is. So, there's some layers to her. Is what I'm hearing you say in this conversation. And that like the first layer is she wasn't expecting a call from Clarissa, so she's a little taken aback. And I want you to know that for yourself somewhere, that when Leah is taken aback, she becomes more precise and formal in her conversation. Because like these lines, like, "Good afternoon, Leah Stratton. Mom, it's Clarissa." She heard Leah's trademark sound of surprise, a small catch in her throat that always stopped from becoming anything bigger. That's a really nice like character note to let us know like this is what Leah is feeling. "Clarissa, how lovely to hear your voice. How are you?" So that's kind, but not warm.
No, that's appropriate for their relationship, really.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice turn. And I also like what you're doing with her silence. So, but that to say, like, I like now that I understand what you're doing with her voice, I like the formality of it because it's her by surprise. Just make sure that whenever she's caught by surprise, she modulates her voice in this way.
Okay.
It's got to be consistent through the book, is what I'm saying. Yeah. And it is, I also like what you're doing here in the daughter assuming that things are going to go poorly. And so treating the mother with a little bit of hostility, even before the mother does it. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. When I was thinking about how this conversation with you would go around this, I thought underlying the way Clarissa is responding, and that's spot on, she is basically angry with her mother.
Yeah, and it comes, but it's suppressed. It feels suppressed.
The long simmering suppressed anger, and that's kind of like a bass note.
Yeah, and I think you hit that really well. Like some of these lines, like, "Fine, and you, are you busy?" The double question there is really nice because she doesn't actually give her a chance to say how she is. She says, like, "How are you?" "Fine, and you, are you busy?" Right? Like it's I don't actually care how you are, I'm cutting you off. It's a really well done thing. She says, "Not too busy to talk to my only daughter, and well, except for the tooth I chipped yesterday, most annoying. How's the world treating you?"
It's really formal, right? It's quite
very formal, very like, I'm talking to my next door neighbor, not my daughter.
I think the other thing about Leah's voice, she's always wondering what she's going to hear from Clarissa, because Clarissa is hardly ever in touch. And there's been so many times where, oh God, what's she doing now, sort of thing. So she's kind of a little bit on guard.
Yeah, a little bit of the like problem child syndrome having like,
Yeah,
this is my
very
problem
late.
child. Yeah. I would give Clarissa more full stops
Okay.
because it shows that like self-correcting where
Yes.
she's stopping and like putting on a front for her mom. So like for here example, good, comma, excellent actually, but you'd be surprised at what I'm doing now, comma, in a good way, comma, I mean.
Mhm.
So I would make this more like choppy, as if she's like correcting herself as she talks. It'll be a
Okay.
nice contrast to
Yeah.
the mother's for Melly, where she's like, good, period, excellent, actually, period.
Mm.
But you might be surprised at what I'm doing right now, period. Surprised in a good way, I mean. Right?
The
Like
other
so
good,
give for that like
yeah.
it's that like defensiveness before her mother actually says anything. Where
It
she's
also,
like,
to me, sounds like, and I really liked the tone you had there. It sounds like Clarissa's determined to control the conversation.
yeah, 100%.
Mm.
Like I'm taking charge of this. I'm good. No, I'm excellent. So that you can't say you're not really good,
Mm.
right? And I've got big news. In a great news in a good way, right? Like doing that, like I'm gonna set the tone here, and I'm kind of stumbling through it because I'm suppressing all these emotions, but I'm gonna hold on to it.
Sort of
I think,
preempting in a way.
oh, totally, 100% preempting. And then I like this, like, yes, the number you're calling from isn't my phone. It's where is it actually, right? Like her mother saying that, and then her saying, I'm not teaching in Gibson anymore. It's like a great, like preemptive, like, I'm not gonna tell you where I am, but I'm not teaching in Gibson anymore. I might give Clarissa some body language here where she like sighs, like gives like an exasperated sigh, or like rolls her eyes, or has like a thought about how like, oh, so this is what we're going to talk about now. I'm not teaching in Gibson anymore, mom. Right? Like just like giving a little more aggression to this statement. And then when she says, in fact, and then her mother cuts her off, let us know that this is supposed to be an interruption.
Yes, it needs the line, doesn't it? Not the dots.
It needs a dialogue tag that says, before Clarissa could finish, her mother cut her off. So you've moved to greener pastures.
Yeah.
Right? A promotion, perhaps. And then you might note at the end here that like there's doubt in Leah's voice, right? Like that she doesn't actually think she got a promotion. No. But it's that like using those dialogue tags here, even though it's a two-person conversation and you don't need them, using them strategically to build that emotional resonance of what's going on and let the reader know, like, no, she interrupted her. She asked going on to greener pastures, and then ask a question that she expects a no to, right? Like just to build that kind of sense between the two. And then this is fantastic. Clarissa heard herself come out with a strangled sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a nervous cough. It was not a sound she usually made. I might add a sentence there about how she feels about it. It was not a sound she usually made, and something she wished she could immediately take back. Right? Like just like tell us like what she feels about that. Clarissa says something happened, and then it's fine. Nothing for you to worry about. Like this is all great. And then left, there was stunned silence. I would have, so here, Clarissa's losing control of the conversation.
Yes.
And so you need her like scrambling to get it back.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, so she needs to fill that silence with some scramble.
I did wonder about that when I read that. I thought, I do want the silence to just, because part of me also, as I through this, I'm feeling like, even though I haven't said it, I'm feeling like Clarissa, even though she's treating the call as I have to let my mother know I'm overseas, I bet it's sort of a duty.
Yeah.
but she's a bit nervous. But my problem with that is that I'm picking up the nervousness too much in my mind, because it's more what is provoked in Leah, which I know as a
Oh,
result. So,
yeah.
I don't know if there should be a nervousness with
Um,
Clarissa hovering as well. Or is
okay.
that just confusing things? So I wasn't sure
Well,
about this.
so there's two ways Clarissa can respond here.
Mm,
And I feel you're saying like I'm torn between the two.
I am a bit.
So up here, she's trying to control the conversation.
Mm,
And like we liked that. You liked that. And then we get here where she starts losing control of the conversation.
mm,
So I was saying, like, send her to nervous scramble to try to get it back, right? Like, well,
mm,
it's just, well, I've left New Zealand. Left? There was a stunned silence. Yeah, I couldn't stay here forever, Mom. I had to go. Things were happening. You wouldn't understand what was happening. I had to go. Do you mean
okay.
you left with a boyfriend? The one you mentioned last year? No, no, forget him. I don't want to talk about it. Right? Like you have that scramble down here.
Mm,
The other way to go with Clarissa is to make her exasperated,
uh-huh.
right? Left,
Mm,
Clarissa sighed and put down the phone and walked away from it. Like
oh,
not hung up, but just like laid it on the counter and was
no,
just like, and then show her, because we're seeing the conversations from her perspective. So have her put the phone down, walk away from it, and just be, I don't like have her say to herself, like, I don't even know what to do with this. And then have her pick it back up and have her mom say, like, Clarissa, are you there? Do you mean you left with your boyfriend? The one you mentioned last year? And then this needs to be more hostile
okay.
than nervous. It needs to be back to that, like, I'm taking back control of this conversation.
Mm,
Forget the boyfriend, right? I don't want to talk about him. I'm not with a man. I'm not with anyone. I have a teaching job. It is wonderful. And it's in the Pacific, right? Like have her like retake that control. That would be the other way to go.
okay.
So the nervous, and a lot of it has to do with like, where are you going with their relationship?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
The nervous scramble is more the like, I really want my mom's approval. I don't know that I'll ever get it.
Mm,
And so I'm avoiding her. The like declaratory is like, I'm trying to escape these expectations that my mother has for me that I'll never live up to. And I just don't really want anything to do with her, but I'm here out of a sense of obligation.
mm,
Right. So the question is like, how does Clarissa feel through the rest of the book about her mother? And what's the relationship that you're going to repair? Does that make sense? Because if it's the former, where she's nervous, then when her mother shows up, we need scenes of Clarissa kind of bumbling, trying to earn her mother's approval and not getting it, until finally she has an explosion and she's like, I don't want your approval anymore, never mind. And then her and her mother have a moment where her mother's like, no, I always approved of you, right? The other side of the like, I'm done with you, when the mother shows up to see her, the mother's going to have to chase her for a while and earn her forgiveness. And then Clarissa can look at her mother and be like, I don't even know why you're here. This isn't the relationship we have. This isn't what you did. Like, this isn't what you, Mom, built in our relationship. And then the mother needs to be the one that has the like reckoning with what happened. Does that make sense? So like, depending, and I know it's weird to say like their first conversation determines the arc of their story.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm
But it
thinking hard.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
And you can start to feel that like, once you get this first conversation set, you can start to feel the beats that you need to reconcile these two women, right? Like, and as the stuff gets unveiled, you can start to see how they respond to it, right? Like as things become unveiled about their family history, is Clarissa bumbling through these reveals, wondering what that means, what position that puts her in her mother's eyes, constantly trying to make herself what her mother wants her to be? Or does Clarissa, are these reveals happening and Leah is trying to connect with her and she could care less about how Leah feels about all these things, right? Like, so the question is like, this first conversation also brings in that interaction around, and to create that like solid story arc where we're going to see growth from these two characters.
It's more the latter, I think.
What is that? It's more the latter. Yeah, I like that arc for Clarissa because it feeds well into her need for control of her own life, right? Like, it feeds well into like, this was the woman in an abusive relationship who just one day, in a very determined but fearful way, threw everything she had in a suitcase and flew across a country to go start a new life, right? Like, it feeds very well into like, I got to the new life and I'm struggling with the fact that I'm out of control, that I don't know the language, that I don't know this. And now my mother showed up and I'm trying to master all these things and get my new life going. And my mother is here doing this thing and I didn't ask her to be here and I just need her to leave, right? Like, there's a nice character arc there.
Good, okay.
Of
Good.
kind of like Clarissa struggling with needing other people, connecting with other people, trusting other people, that I think would be good. Yeah. So here she says, my goodness, Clarissa, that's certainly different.
And I missed a response. I don't believe it.
So I would, but here's where I would go a different direction with this conversation. Because later Clarissa brings up the brother. I was like, tell me about my brother.
Ah, yes, I saw what you did. I like the suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, so here's where I would do that, where she says, my goodness, Clarissa, that's certainly different. Give me a line about Clarissa hearing the judgment in her voice.
Okay.
And being sick of that judgment. And then here's where she pivots the conversation to talk about her brother.
Right.
Because she wants to take control of the conversation. She wants to get off of this. She does want to know about Tim. Tim is his name, right?
Simon.
Simon. She does want to know about Simon. So here's where she's like, how's Simon doing?
Okay.
No explanation as to why the pivot. No answer to this judgment. Just like, how's Simon doing? Yeah. Never mind.
We do that. That's so human.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, my wife and my mother-in-law had like judgment issues at times in their lives where, like, my mother-in-law was always like wanted my wife to be like the perfect daughter, and my wife is very much a tomboy and like just didn't fit the mold. She would do this all the time.
Gosh, this sounds familiar.
I know. My mother-in-law would be like, well, I really, I really wish that this thing could happen on Sunday. And my wife would be like, hey, did Dad get his car fixed? Just like, pivot. Yeah, I heard you. I'm not going to respond to you. I'm going to pivot the conversation of something that we can talk about that has nothing to do with you judging me, right? Like, so it's a very natural thing that we do. But if you bring in the conversation about Tim here,
okay,
then you can come.
Then would Leah bring it back to this issue, or would Clarissa?
Yes, Leah. Clarissa's done, but Leah's going to come back, right? So you'll have to get rid of this rambling from Clarissa, because that's not going to be Clarissa's voice. Or is that Leah rambling?
No, that's Clarissa.
That's
Clarissa just giving it all to her, right?
Yeah, and so
information dumping away, and also asserting that she's with somewhere you've probably never heard of, and it doesn't matter what you think, and here it is, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, if you want to keep that, it just needs to be that more like controlled and determined. And then here in Vanuatu, Leah's finished. Tana's Vanuatu, that's right. Clarissa said she can't be reeling, right? Like, she needs to be in control.
Well, she's reeling in reaction to the fact that, first of all, there's been this this sharp intake of breath from Leah when she heard Clarissa say, "I'm in Tana," little
Yeah,
place she's probably never heard of, which wouldn't make sense to Clarissa. And then and which she's going to tell her it's in Vanuatu, and Leah says it's in Vanuatu.
gotcha. I'm following you
Yeah.
now. Okay. So this is Clarissa. If you want to keep this section, this is either where they pick back up, they talk about Tim, and then somewhere in the middle of talking about Tim, Leah says, "Now where's the school?" And then
Okay.
you can have this like information dump where Clarissa's like, "Oh, we're talking about the school again." I'd probably have a couple bites, like, "Where's the school?" And then have her say, like, "Tim's in school." No, you. Where's the
Yeah.
school that you're at?
Yeah. So Leah's
And
really wanted to bring it back.
yeah,
Clarissa's still.
she wants to get out of this conversation. She wants to talk about Tim and be like, "Well, tell Tim I said hi, and I'll talk to you later, Bob." Right? Like, bye. I'll call you in 2 more years. So like, that's what her hope is. And at some point in that break in the Simon, I keep saying Tim, some point in that break in the Simon conversation, have her jump in and be like, "So now where's the school?" Be like,
Right.
"Simon's at school?" "No, where's your school?" You know, and then have her like, "I was really lucky to get this job. It's a year contract, but it's probably going to be longer. It's a great job. I mean, so I'm going to keep it as long as they let me. You know, I'm on a small island. You've probably never heard of it. It's called Tana." And then like you can do the sharp intake in Vantu. That's right? Like you can have this like reeling of like, how did she know that? And then the silence continued for what felt like an eternity. Now you have to tell us, because this is from Clarissa's perspective, you have to tell us what she's doing during this silence, right? Like we need to know what's happening. We need to be able to visualize. Is she like fiddling with something? Is she like, you know, I've been on calls where somebody's silent and I like cut my hand over the phone and then just like, you know, kind of like silently scream and like shake the phone around. Like, what's she doing here in this silence? And then we can come back to like, yes. And then you can close out the conversation. Right. Clarissa, there's nothing. And then, you know, it's a great country. This is good. Yes. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where to end it. Primitive, the words flare darts. No, good grief, no. Leah sounded lost in words. You better get used to it. This is a good place to end. Right? You better get used to it. I like the primitive place and I plan on staying. Her body shook. She took a determined breath. This was not what she wanted. Why had a simple conversation turned into another battle? This is a great, like you're building to a perfect ending here. God, Clarissa, I didn't mean, I was just shocked to hear that you've gone so far overseas, but now I've got over the shock. And I would put a little more bite to this. It sounds like a wonderful opportunity. I'm sure you're going to be very happy. Right? Like, give it a little bit of like, bring back that like cynicism. And then like, yes, right, mother. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I do think at that point, Leah is just so shell-shocked.
Yeah, and that's true. And so it may be good just to keep it, but whatever her voice modulates to here, you almost want to represent here, knowing the character arc that Leah's going to go to, you almost want to hint to how Leah's going to have to behave to get Clarissa to actually like come around. Clarissa's not going to come around now, but because this is nice, right? Like where she starts to like, where Leah starts to break down here. Clarissa, please bear with me. Leah's voice sounded strange. She took a breath. I'm truly glad you're doing something new and interesting. Honestly, I am. Right? Like that's really nice. That's a nice moment for Leah and a nice like voice modulation that she'll have to come back to later when it's time for her to actually like make amends with Clarissa. So I would keep this modulation in mind because you're going to have to come back to it later in the story. And then, you know, I would end here because you've already brought up the Simon stuff. So like, look, well, I've told you where I am. There's nothing else to say and I have to go.
Mm.
And then like you give her kind of like one, I really am happy for you. Like, all right, mom, bye. And then hang up the phone. And just remember that like once you hang up the phone, we do need this last line of Clarissa swallowed hard and hung up. Like we need to know what Clarissa's feeling at the end of the call.
Okay.
Leah's feelings are going to be somewhat of a mystery. Like, does Leah hang up the phone and cry? Does Leah hang up the phone? Yeah. But so at the end of this scene, we're in Clarissa's POV. So we have to have that like,
okay,
what she does and how she feels after she hangs up the phone. Yeah. Okay, I think that covers everything I have. Anything else you want to talk about with the piece?
Don't think we're pretty much. No, I think stuff around conflict I had as a discussion topic, which we've done.
Yeah.
The other one was about dealing with another language and culture. We've talked about that. They were no, not really.
Yeah, and again, lean into that other language, that culture. That's a great device. So yeah. So I'm really excited about your book. The chapters I read before this one were really great. This one's fantastic. I think it has a ton of potential.
Way to go. Way to go.
It'll be good. All right, I'm going to stop the recording and we can talk a little bit more. Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.